Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sah Viryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Samasta Janakalyane Nirtam Karunamayam Namami Chinmayam Devam Sadgurum Brahma Vidvaram. Howdy, everyone. Welcome back to Booklight. We're beginning our very first chapter today of As I Think. And for those of you who are able to tune in via Facebook Live, we're happy to have you. And for everyone else who's with us on Zoom today, please feel free to participate fully. What that means is, over the next 30-35 minutes, questions may arise. So please feel free to ask your questions in the form of a direct message to me. You can message Amar, and you can ask your questions for the Q&A portion after Swamiji's satsang. We'll have announcements a little bit later, but now I'll pass it off to our team to introduce Swamiji for this evening. Hari Om.
Hari Om, everyone. Before we begin, I wanted to take a minute to humbly introduce Swamiji. So Swami Swatmanandaji is one of the most dynamic leaders of Chinmay Mission. A Swami of Chinmay Mission South Mumbai. He completed the Vedanta course from Powai from 1998 to 2000. He expounds the philosophy of Advaita Vedanta through talks on the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, and other texts of Vedanta, and Bhakti through camps, meditation, retreats, interactive sessions, and discussions for youth and adults. He inspires the youth with dynamic spirituality, encourages them to think and question. Uses various mediums like theater plays, treks, outdoor experimental learning programs, and music. He also took the Youth Empowerment Program in India and inspired Chinmaya Pradeep, an outdoor Vedantic vision park at Sandipani Sadhanalaya, Powai. And he's also a playwright and has written and directed 2 theatrical performances, one of them being Adrishya, A Quest for the Unseen, based on the Saraswati civilization, and developed India, just like that, a play based on the Bhagavad Gita. We are so thankful that Swamiji is able to join us for Booklight today, and we look forward to being inspired by him. Hari Om.
So Hari Om and salutations to one and all. Shubhani ji and to all of you present here. Thank you for this opportunity. It's wonderful to share Puja Gurudev's vision with all of you. Today also happens to be a very significant day for us. It is the YEP day. When Yuvavir program was started on 22nd September, I think 2013, not 13, 2003, I think. So each year we celebrate this as a YEP day, and it's wonderful to share with you. So this book, As I Think, outlines the vision of Puja Gurudev. We should understand the background also, that when Gurudev, why did he start this whole thing? You know, in an army, they have various operations, you see. So when they have to do some rescue mission, or they have to attack an enemy, or they have to defend, or they have to even, let us say, help the public, whether there is a flood or any such thing, they need to build a bridge. They use the word operation. So Gurudev also had launched an operation, and that operation is called Operation Fakiristan. Because in Gangotri, there is this place called Fakiristan, where the sadhus and mahatmas, they get together and they do a lot of discussions, and many times Gurudev would find it very dry. So once on the banks of Gangaji, he was sitting there, and that's where he felt the urge to bring this knowledge to the masses. So that's where he says in his words that, can I face the educated class of India and bring to their faithless hearts at least a ray of understanding of what our wondrous culture stands for. Sitting on the banks of the roaring Ganga, I shivered as I pondered the thought. None could argue against the eternal truth that man is in essence God, but could I explain it to others? Now this is the moment of his inspiration where he feels that this knowledge must go to the masses, and this is the wondrous knowledge of our culture. Why did he feel so? Is because he also had worked earlier as a journalist, fought for the freedom of the country, transformed when he went to Swami Shivanandaji and Swami Taponji Maharaj, and he understood the essence of our culture. So he felt this must go to the masses because the people were deprived of this knowledge and hence the consequent decadence of culture had happened. So what exactly is culture? So Gurudev says, when a group of people stay together for a long period of time in a certain geographical area, following certain norms and values, the identity of that group and the fragrance of their life, what comes about, is called as the culture. So Gurudev found that this culture of ours, you see, people have been staying together for the longest period of time. In fact, we are today the most ancient culture in the world. From pre-Bronze Age, if we have to see, the only surviving culture, the living culture, is Sanatana Dharma, the Vedic culture. More than at least 10,000 years old. I mean, that is if one says historically based on what people accept. So even though the group has been staying together for a long period of time, the identity that we are Hindus and we are belonging to one culture had started declining. Various groups were formed. The essence was denied, blind ritualism was happening, the decadence happened in the caste system. Many things were happening whereby the pride of being a follower of this glorious Vedic culture was coming down. So when Gurudev went to Swami Taponji Maharaj, telling him, asking his permission that I want to go down, in the beginning Swamiji said no. Those who want the knowledge, they will come to you. So Gurudev heard, he didn't argue, but after a few weeks he went back again because he said the urge is irresistible. See, we have to understand that feeling, that when he felt that the urge is irresistible, Taponji Maharaj told him that take a tour to the plains of this country, go down and see if you are able to maintain this knowledge of Vedanta, that you are not this body, mind, intellect, and it will rub off your ego. So May 1951, Gurudev took up this plan. He started touring this whole country, and by October he returned. And that Operation Fakiristan became the Gangotri plan. That he came up with a plan that how to revive this culture, because he says that I was miserably disillusioned and disappointed at the working plans of all the ashrams and temples, at the stuff that was doled out as the best of Hinduism. So now when he felt, he met people, there are pictures of his tour also, from all the way from the Himalayas, came down up to the tip of India, went to Kerala, Rameshwaram, many places he toured, and he understood what is the scenario in this country. If you see, even Vivekananda ji had done that. Before he went to World Parliament of Religions, he had gone across the country. 7 years he was in this country, from 1886 to 1893. Understood the throbbing of the country, what is the pulse of the people. So when he felt that this culture is declining, he felt an urgent need that I have to revive this. So these two facts, these 2 points we should not forget, that cultural revival and nation building are a very, very core aspect of Gurudev's vision. The knowledge of the scriptures is with the attitude, with the vision that this culture has to be revived. So what is the meaning of decline of the culture? The chapter says dawn of our culture. And Gurudev starts with the word renaissance. Renaissance of a culture can be brought about only when people get inspired by the values recommended by it. So any revival has to happen, that means there's a decline. What is the decline? As we see, when people stop living the values, Gurudev himself explains in this first article. So when people start losing the essence, when they don't understand the beauty of this culture, the values, the main part of culture is the values. And what is the value system inherent in our Sanatan Dharma? Is to rise from the material to spiritual. Not that material achievements are insignificant and are condemned. One can acquire all of that. Artha and Kama are the first two Purusharthas. But one should not be stuck there. From the Bhautik Samskriti to the Adhyatmik Samskriti, one has to evolve. The inner evolution is the core. And to realize the absolute vision of oneness is the main goal. All activities of Sanatan Dharma are helping to evolve towards that. So obviously when there is no barrier that Vedanta accepts, including this body, then caste, community, creed, gender, nationality, everything falls apart. That universal vision of oneness is the crux of Sanatan Dharma. That we all are appearances, expressions of one absolute truth, and our true nature is that infinite reality. Like Gurudev said, none can argue that man is in essential nature is God. But that high philosophy which the great rishis have managed to present to us so beautifully in practically applicable ways to lift ourselves from the body identification to that had declined. And whenever the decline happens, indulgence increases, body identification increases, corruption increases, groupism, fighting, many of those things increase. So that's why the revival of this culture is revival of the vision. And that's why he says here that it cannot be brought about, it can be brought about only when people get inspired by the values recommended by it. So various places in the scripture, there are many, many values which are given. But what is the essence of the values? If we see, so the essence of values is in 3 values. SAB, sub. Sub means everything. So all values are covered in these 3. What are the 3? Satyam, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya. Simple. Gurudev speaks about it in the Manual of Self-Unfoldment, Kindle Life. Fundamental, the whole Sanatan Dharma rests on the 3 pillars, Satyam, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya. Satyam, don't compromise intellectually. Ahimsa, mentally don't hurt anybody, don't think ill of anybody. And at physical level, live in moderation, that is Brahmacharya. Now these values, if we follow, then we become ready to realize the absolute. Now why was this decline happening? Because our culture has faced the onslaught from so many people, outside as well as inside. That's why he says the long history of political, cultural servitude and political slavery. After a long history of political slavery and cultural servitude, we have just come into freedom. So these are early, in those years when he wrote these letters, when freedom was attained, but we didn't feel the pride. You see, political freedom is one thing, but culturally, our whole morale was destroyed, especially by replacing the education system, by removing Sanskrit, by ensuring that the masses are made to feel low about their own culture. And is it not true that even today that continues? The same education system is being followed, where we are taught about the glory of the invaders, the glory of people who attacked us, but our own people's resistance and the fight that they had put up to sustain this culture is not projected at all. There is no single culture in the whole world which has gone through such an onslaught and still survived. They all have finished. They are wiped out. This is one culture which has survived, and it is thriving also. Because there have been people who have given great sacrifices. Now that was not taught to us. So the Hindus, how they have grown up, and our un-Aryan nature, we find ourselves merely labeled as Hindus. We are Hindus just because we are born as Hindus. Not the, we don't feel the pride of this culture. When we don't feel the pride of this culture, we don't even want to proclaim that I'm a Hindu. Today we have come to that state where nobody wants to say I'm a Hindu. At least I'm speaking for Bharat here. Many times people feel, no, I am secular. I am not a Hindu. You see, so that notion is there where inherently Hindu culture is most secular culture. But unfortunately, this division has been created, Hindu versus secular. So we are merely Hindus. And what does the intelligentsia think? The intelligentsia in the country has learned to ignore their culture and their religion as something redundant and unnecessary. Sad state of affairs, isn't it? What he wrote at that time is so much more relevant today. What is being taught, what is being propagated much more aggressively is this anti-Hindu propaganda. That this culture is rigid, this culture is inflexible, this culture believes in exploitation through the caste system. In this culture there is animal sacrifice, they are not environment friendly, so many such things. It is very ritualistic, it is blind rituals, it is superstition, it is old belief systems. These need to be removed. Women were not given equal status. There is a lot of exploitation of women. I mean, the list can go on of what the intelligentsia has been fed and is continued to be fed. If you see about every festival of ours today, there is a problem, which is what is being projected. You see, Shivratri, you should not offer milk because you are wasting milk. Holi, you should not play with colors because you are wasting water. Dahi handi, you should not make the, what we call the Govinda. When they do, they make the human pyramid and they break. That is against the safety of the people. You see, below 3 tires you can't do. Now that is a rule. In India, we used to do 12, go up to 12. Some places 14. 14 levels they will climb, and months together they will plan in Janmashtami. Navaratri, noise pollution, so Dandiya cannot be played beyond 10 p.m. Diwali, crackers will create environmental issues. I mean, every single festival there is a problem. So the intelligentsia today thinks that to scoff at this culture is fashion. So that's what he is saying here, that the intelligentsia thinks it is redundant, unnecessary. Today it has gone to the next level where it is thinking it is harmful. So one is going away from it. The middle class sincere today, but they think it is only superstition, and many those who are living it also are living it by proxy, Gurudev says. And the followers of this culture, they live only the non-essential externalism of the religion without appreciating the significance. Now this is the state. One thing we should understand here is to build a culture takes many generations, because culture is philosophy in action. If that philosophy is not translated into action, it will be dry philosophy. And if that culture does not have the backing of a strong philosophy, that cultural practice will be superstition. It will just be a mechanical ritual. So to build this culture, meaning to sustain the philosophy, then make this application in daily life, takes a long period of time. Many generations have to live it for it to take the shape that it takes. Now, apathy of one generation is enough to destroy it. Simple example I will give you. Sandhya Vandan is a beautiful practice in our culture. How many people do Sandhya Vandan? What our forefathers, ancestors used to do regularly, they begin the day with that. Today, so many of us, we don't do Gayatri Vandan at all. And then we will become a part of a group which is so-called a HEP group, which believes in sun worship. We believe in sun worship. And then Amazon will have these sun worship kits, and then go on buying sun worship kits from there, and then face the sun and offer the water and feel I am so relieved. I feel so stress-free. Early morning I get exposed to the sun. I get vitamin D. I get nice oxygen. Are Baba, Gayatri Mantra was that only. Your culture taught you so beautifully. And then they will chant the Gayatri Mantra also without proper intonation, with all tabla, peti, music, harmonium, everything. So that's how slowly we lose. And our culture, our people don't follow. I'm not saying others should not follow, but when the natives don't follow that, somebody else is taking it up, then it comes repackaged from there to us. How sad is that? Shraddha period just went. 18 days of, 15 days of Shraddha period just went. How many people do even Shraddha today? What is the meaning of Shraddha? In every culture, there is so much of importance given to ancestor worship, to thanksgiving to them, to feel gratitude towards them. So many cultures do that. But in our country, so many people will not follow Shraddha. And many parents will say so proudly that I have told my children that don't do any Kriya Karma after me. I'm fine. I don't need any such rituals. I don't believe in rituals. But when they have to go from one country to another, when they travel, they need food. That preparation they will do. That they will tell children, that the parents also will give children, children also will give the parents. That you will do. But Shraddha Karma, when you are on your final journey from here, nothing you need. Wonderful. So the apathy of one generation. If one generation says, I will not do this, it's over. That entire practice which was built over many generations just gets lost. So this is what has happened in our country. Now Gurudev felt that we need to revive this from its spirit, from the essence, the knowledge that why we should do this. When it is brought back, the vision is lifted of what is the higher goal of life, then slowly the culture would revive. The core of Sanatana Dharma is Vedanta. If you remove Vedanta from Sanatana Dharma, it will look like just ritualistic practices. This Vedanta is what he thought to bring to the masses. And so therefore he says to invoke the Usha, Usha means the dawn. To invoke the Usha of our culture would be to bring the salient features of Hinduism and the inexhaustible beauties of our culture to the understanding of our generation. Each generation has to try and do this, to understand the core values, to live it uncompromisingly and pass it on to the next generation. This is a part of our Rishi Rina, what we call as the debt to the great masters and the Rishis. It becomes our sadhana also, and passing on the culture is a very important aspect. You see, in the world, people pass on their legacies. They pass on the wealth they have, the family name, the empire that they have built, all that they pass on. Same way one has to pass on the legacy of the culture, legacy of spiritual knowledge. And hence, how it should be done. With each generation, the generation keeps growing in its thoughts, in its value systems, in its interactions with the world. So one has to adapt the presentation, retaining the core values as it is. That's why Gurudev says here that, but we have to consider the modern problems and conditions of living and bring out the necessary changes in our technique of spreading the knowledge of our national culture among ourselves. We need to understand and present it in modern, appealing ways. That is one aspect. But the second aspect is, how is it the need of the hour? The people who think it is irrelevant, unnecessary, and harmful, if they understand that the problems we are facing today, the solution for that is there in this culture. We have stress issues, we have depression, we have anxiety, we have so many mental health issues, suicides are rising, divorce cases are rising, there is drugs, there is terrorism, there is global warming, so many problems we have in this country, in this whole world as such. Study of Vedanta, how will it help me to handle all this? If I am able to present it that way, then and present it in a way in which it is more appealing also. Both these are very important. Establish that this is a solution for your problems. Otherwise, today this solution is being considered as a problem. How sad is that? In medicine only is considered as the cause of the disease. How is a medicine cause of the disease? Medicine removes the disease. These fundamental values, this spiritual vision will actually help to strengthen the mind. You know, J.R.D. Tata, he said a very beautiful line. He said, I don't want India to be a rich country. I want India to be a happy country. Because if India becomes a happy country, wealth and richness and other things will anyway come. But when we run behind other things, we lose happiness. We lose the inner focus. So all the challenges that we have today, Vedanta has a lot of direct impact on it where we can solve these challenges. When Gurudev came to the US and he addressed the UN there, Planet in Crisis was the topic that he was given. And what did he say in that? He said, open the map of the world and close your eyes and put your finger anywhere on this map. And is that place not boiling with problems and challenges? What is the solution? Outer world we can make changes, but the real solution comes from within. And that's where he also emphasized that through individual transformation alone, world transformation is possible. So his vision was to make people understand that this knowledge can help you in your daily life. It is not just about realizing Brahman. That is the highest goal. Vedanta is not an exclusive knowledge. Vedanta is all inclusive. And hence it is that we need to refine our ways. He tried in his ways. At those times, what are the ways possible? He tried. And he says something very nice here again. A shattered nation of wild groups, each trying to step over the other, is not an arrangement from which we can hope to get any teamwork or cooperative endeavor in our nation building activities. Two important points: teamwork, nation building. How did Gurudev develop this whole Chinmaya movement? And not just the Chinmaya movement. For him, Chinmaya movement was a tool for the larger vision of nation building and cultural revival. He inspired so many organizations because he was very passionate about it. On any current issue that the culture was going through, he would make statements, he would inspire people, whether India was in a war with Pakistan or China, or whether India is, the Ram temple has been broken, Babri Masjid has been broken there, or any other issue happening, the emergency happened in India, freedom of speech was gagged, so many issues and challenges which were there, he would respond and he would guide people, this is the outlook, this is how we need to respond. And he built teams everywhere. So in our sharing of this knowledge, are we doing these three things consciously? Things to revive culture, to build teams who have this higher vision, and work towards nation building. Wherever we are, in that country, we must be supportive to build the glory of that nation. So he was very, very clear about this, and we should also be very clear about that. So he said, this is one thing which will bind all of us. From Bharat standpoint, when we see various places have various cultures, each state is diverse. But what is it that binds us? Politically, we may be having different geographical boundaries of each state, the way of food, the way of the language we communicate in, the customs, traditions, some of them are different, very wide variety we find in our country. But still, what united us? You see, many people today think that there was no identity called Bharat at all. It's all kingdoms only. And there are these Breaking India forces who try to propagate this. There was no identity called Bharat. There's nothing called India. There's only, it was all clusters of kingdoms, each king fighting with the other, trying to expand their kingdom. But that is not true. We had an identity, we have an identity called Bharat. The Vedas mention about it, the Puranas mention about it. And there are people who have come here not because they heard about a kingdom, because they heard about Bharat. So what united all of us is this culture, the Vedic culture. Even today, we see that so many practices are same across the length and breadth of our country. Lord Shiva was worshipped in Kashmir. Today, the situation of Kashmir is very different, but it is the land of Kashyap Rishi. And Kashmir Shaivism is one of the most powerful methods of worship of Lord Shiva. So Shivji was worshipped in Kashmir, worshipped down in the south also, in the northeast, as well as in the west, everywhere. Similar festivals we have celebrated, similar shlokas we chant, similar values we follow. So what united us is this glorious culture, is this knowledge that we consider each other as divine. And so he says here that our respect for and reverence of our distinct national culture is what has kept us together, bound. The dissemination of these fundamental ideas is therefore imperative in the context of our fast collapsing present day history. We have to bring back to the people that knowledge, that how we have lived together. There may have been political, fights with each other, in which family it does not happen. In every home it happens, because that human being is, one works out of that. But we still are one. That vision of oneness has to be brought. As a country we are one, as a culture we are one, as a team we are one. If these three levels of oneness we are able to bring about, then we would have tried and implement Gurudev's vision to some extent. So in our interaction with Balvihar children, with our youth, with our junior chicks, with elders, with everybody, when we speak about Shastra, when we reflect on the books of Puja Gurudev, we need to keep these 3 points in mind. Present it in these ways to people using innovative methods. Today there are so many technological methods, online things and tools we have, many activities we have. That presentation also has to change. In those times, you see what Gurudev did, Jnana Yajnas, he wanted to create awareness. And what was the method of creating awareness that he chose? He chose Jnana Yajna. So when he chose Jnana Yajna, that was a unique thing at that time, because not many were speaking. In fact, he was the first speaker to come and speak in English, address the large masses, and speak in a language which people could understand, present it scientifically, rationally. So we need to understand that that time Jnana Yajnas were working, and many times he used to take it for months together. Then he himself reduced it as time passed, and he understood he was also becoming more busy. People's needs also changed. So finally his Jnana Yajnas would be 3 days, because people don't have time, pressures of life have increased. So in today's context, how are we presenting? That is important. We can't stick to only those days. Today, 1.5 hours of talk, people can't listen. Attention spans have become less. So we need to, innovate. He innovated at that time, Jnana Yajna. What is the innovation we are doing today? How are we presenting? With so many social media platforms available, are we becoming more easily accessible to people? Many things we have to understand and present it. So for him, Jnana Yajnas was one method. Today we need more interactive based sessions. We need more hands-on sessions, more activity oriented sessions, because people have become that much more demanding of those things, because their mind has also changed, the situation has changed. So when he started with this Jnana Yajna, the fundamentals remaining the same, that we want to pass on the knowledge. We have to see how to adapt it. What he gave in Jnana Yajnas for people to understand, because he would be there for about a month or so, and everybody is charged, inspired, they are listening to him morning and evening. After he goes, what happens? So he formed the study groups for it. Now, what was the vision of the study groups? To crystallize those ideas taught in the Yajna-shala during these seminar sessions or Yajnas, we have organized ourselves into the mission groups, wherein the seekers try to live and assimilate the Hindu culture. The mission groups have been multiplying very healthily, and each of them has been taking the torch of knowledge lit up in the Yajna-shala very faithfully to different mohallas of their own cities. This was the vision. The study group is not meant to just be a very cozy, comfortable group where we come, discuss very nicely, intellectually, and then we have terrific arguments of various vadas, and this person said this, that person said this, and then we will become like those dry intellectual sadhus, which Gurudev said he was not very inspired by that. There can be deep discussions, no doubt, but is the missionary spirit there or not? He said the torch has to be lit up. The torch lit up in Yajna-shala has to reach every mohalla. Gurudev's system was what? In his time, he said, if anybody has done Kindle Life, Atma Bodh, Bhaju Govindam. Tattva Bodh commentary was not there at that time. So he said, anybody who has studied Kindle Life, Atma Bodh and Bhaju Govindam has to compulsorily start a new study class. Continue to study in one class and take one class. We go on studying book after book, and I'm not confident, I can't take a class. What if people ask some questions? I can't answer. That is their prarabdha. Why are you worried? And your image will go down. That is good, no? You are wanting to reduce your ego or not? No, what will they think of me? Arey, what you think of you itself is illusion. Why are you bothered about what they think of you? Take a class. I'm not saying don't prepare thoroughly and just take a class. Anybody who is not very, very clear should just start. No, at least these 3 books you have studied, reflect on it, and take those 3 books what you have already heard. We are not saying take some Upanishad or Bhagavad Gita. Kindle Life, Bhaja Govindam, Atma Bodh, now Tattva Bodh, etc. have come. So Pujya Guruji has made some changes in the study scheme. But the point is that he start taking, and this applies even to the Yuva Kendra members, that when we study certain texts after a few years, because it's a second phase of our sadhana. You see, learning happens in 4 stages. 25% at the feet of teacher, 25% by one's own reflection, 25% by group reflection, and 25% in time. Now that sadhana of group reflection has to happen, so you become a sevak. And the teaching is the best method of learning. There is no other better method. Gurudev himself did that or not? And this hesitation he had, he went to a Mahatma and he said, how can I share knowledge? How can I teach people? And the Mahatma in Uttarkashi told him, don't think that you are teaching anybody, because Guru is Bhagavan alone. You are doing your loud reflection. Your higher intellect is telling your lower mind. Keep that attitude. And Gurudev said that to all of us. And he said, if somebody doesn't know, if you as a sevak don't know some answers, don't worry, bring them to the brahmachari or the swami, because they also need a job, otherwise they will go jobless. So you don't worry, don't hesitate, you just take. That spirit we need. That I have gained so much, how much will I keep taking? Start giving. Go out and reach out, take a class, take a Balvihar class, take a Chik class, take a Shishu Vihar class, share knowledge. Suppose you say, no, I can't take study class, no problem. Small children you can handle, youth you can handle, take any one group, take. So that was his method, and that's what his vision was, that missionary spirit has to be there. Please remember this combination is very important. If one of the things goes away, then we are not living his vision. Anchored in the knowledge of the scriptures, we must have the missionary spirit. Both these are important. We can't just have missionary spirit and not get anchored in scriptures, nor can we have just anchoring in scriptures but no missionary spirit. Why? I am just wanting to realize Brahman. If we were so super sattvic, we would have gone into samadhi already. If we are not going into samadhi, that means we should better go and do missionary work. Simple. Go and share the knowledge with the masses. How to know whether I am ready or not? 3 books you studied. Ask your sevak. Start reflecting. Lesson plans are made. You think about how Gurudev would have started this mission. Sevak training was available that time. Manuals were available. Lesson plans were available. Did people wait? Oh, if somebody gives, then only I can do. No, they started. Today, so much more is available. So that missionary spirit is what is required. Then he goes on to explain about some of the aspects of the study group, where then he says that the objective is they can easily and readily convey the throbs of revival initiated in the various yajna-shalas to the distant corners of the same town or city. So when we work with the missionary spirit, our objective of cultural revival, we should not forget. We should not just get contented saying, okay, in my Balvihar class, there are 100 children. Wonderful. I'm great. Sevak, Sevika. In my junior Chikla, there are some 30 youth. Excellent. Out of those 30, how many Sevaks have you been able to create? How many new classes have started? How many more people are inspired? That has to be our vision. That missionary spirit, one never forgets of cultural revival. So then he gives 3 examples. A stone which is thrown in pond, in a drum of oil, in basin of honey, and in coal tar. 4. The medium, so he says the vibrations are conducted more easily when the medium is more fluid. So as an individual sadhana also we can take up to figure out whether our mind is as clear and what we can say gentle as the water, then the ripples are more, or like the drum of oil, the ripples die away very quickly. In basin of honey it is still less, and in coal tar it is only at the point where the stone hits the tar, but it completely gets just absorbed. How is our mind? Why is given this analogy? From sadhana standpoint, our mind has to become more and more like the water, more and more pure, more and more subtle, more and more available. And that will apply not only inner sadhana, but outside also. How many ripples are we able to create? Or are we just absorbing the knowledge and sitting like, then we'll become like this coal tar. So having given this, then he goes on to say that the Hindu way of life is what we have to bring and to revive. What is the Hindu way of life? What are the values the Hindus follow? What are the certain things that the Hindus will do uncompromisingly? Today there is a need to bring back the Hindu way of life. The Hindus' attitude towards food, Hindus' attitude towards the daily worship, Hindus' attitude towards each other, towards work. What is the Hindus' attitude? In relationships, what is the Hindu way of relating to people? What is the Hindu way of connecting to work? What is the Hindu way of accepting life as it comes? What is the Hindu way of dressing? The way of eating, the way of greeting. See, this is not about becoming a fanatic. This is not about becoming rigid. This is about adapting the values in the modern context. Like, did the whole world not take up Namaste? When Corona started, everybody took up Namaste or not? They could have done this also. But they took up Namaste. Why? There is a deep value behind that. You and I are one. So the idea is so many things that we have been following in our culture. The shoes are left outside the home always. Now today we are doing that. Just because of infection. Oh God, infection should not happen. Otherwise shoes will come into the house. We used to wash the feet before getting into a house, getting into the temple. Cremate the dead Now all those things are getting revived or not, because there is a certain definite understanding of its beauty. That Hindu way of life has to be brought back. If I am a Vedantic student, my clarity is not enough. Am I backing it up with the Hindu way of life or not? And am I inspiring people by that Hindu way of life? That when people look at me, they say that, oh, here is somebody who is a Hindu, but who is so broad-minded, who is so scientific, who is so rational, who is able to achieve great things, who is able to be loving to people around. So that Hindu way of life is born from Vedanta. And that Hindu way of life must reflect in our interactions, that people feel inspired by that. That is what Gurudev wanted from us. And finally, he goes on to say that Vedanta, you see, it was very gratifying to know that in many cities in India today, educated enthusiasts, young and brilliant, can very convincingly present the scientific conclusions of Vedanta and bring about a change of heart in those who have no faith at all. See, to reach out to people who have no faith or no understanding of our culture and to help them to transform, not by force, but by making this knowledge available in an appealing way, convincing way, in a modern way. If they feel inspired, and of course by our example when we live it, we are not out to convert people, we are out to make people aware of this glory. And here it is more about our own culture, our own Hindus who don't have faith in their culture. It is to reach out to them. And that missionary spirit is what is required. So if we are reaching out to the faithful hearts, that is one thing. But we must also reach out to those who don't have the appreciation of this knowledge. How much are we able to do that? That is important. It is not numbers alone. It is the people who, you know, how Gurudev transformed from an agnostic to a believer to a saint. That transformation is what Gurudev wanted for everybody. So that's what our mission has to do, our grassroots activities have to do. And finally, he ends with this, that individually we can do a lot, but media also has to be with us. In this country, especially of ours, the media is not with us even today. Slowly things are changing, but for many generations, media has not been with us. Anti-Hindu propaganda still goes on very rampantly. And in the whole world, there is this idea. Hindu genocide is no genocide. Hindu sadhus being lynched and tortured is not a big news. Hindu people getting affected, no problem. The world is just ignorant to all that. And on the contrary, it will be the opposite propaganda which will go on. So that he ends with this aspect that unfortunately today the Indian press has no respect for such ideas and themes, and we enthusiasts also know not how to put across our ideas in an appealing and entertaining style. Today it is important that many of our people who have this pride of this Sanatan Dharma, they start owning up these media houses and they start ensuring that this wrong propaganda goes. We need to train our people, the journalists. You see, when you go into a journalism course, they are taught so many things which are anti-Hindu. And they are taught literally to go behind sensationalism. I've seen the curriculum of many of them. Some students also have interacted with. So fundamental changes from there need to also get made, that what is being taught to the journalists, to the reporters, to the people who are handling the social media. Because today they are social media influencers. They influence opinions of people just through their articles. And how many people have done such false articles which has no fact, no proper understanding, no proper validity. They just write it and create such hatred, create such issues in the minds of people. So those things all are a part of Gurudev's vision. So in this he has spoken about media also. So even young people who are getting into media must keep this in mind, that we are not saying keep put down somebody else and hype up Hinduism, but at least don't do this anti-Hindu propaganda when there is nothing like that. Many things which are projected, they are not even happening. So that's the first chapter, the dawn of culture. And that's where I stop for today. And anybody wants to ask anything, share, please, you are welcome.
Hariyam Swamiji, thank you so much for starting us so well on this As I Think. For those of you who are on Zoom with us, the opportunity now exists for us to be able to ask Swamiji some questions. So please feel free to message me in the chat. We're very much taking up that spirit of a new more of interactive satsang that Swamiji was talking about, right? So here we are in Zoom, being able to converse with Swamiji across the world, really. So we have some questions, and I'll ask them. The first one, Swamiji, comes from Markandeya, asking, could Swamiji expand upon the idea that Hindu culture is the most secular culture? How is this so?
See, when we say secular, what does that actually mean? If you see actual definition of secularism, secular literally means that government is above religion. Okay, that is the definition of secularism, technically. So government has nothing to do with religion. But that put aside, the word secular today has been used in the context that people think that if I am a Hindu, I am a fanatic. So fanatic versus secular, which respects all culture. So their definition of secular is we respect all. We don't oppress the minorities. We don't do any such things where people are, offended. That's their definition of secularism. Where you don't even be proud of your culture as a majority, because if you do something which is proud of you, where you are proud of your culture, you are affecting other sentiments. Now that is a very perverted definition of secularism. Secularism in this context would mean what? That when we say that Hinduism is secular, is it not true that you can follow any path and you can still be a Hindu? Number one, in Hinduism, there is no fanaticism that only if you worship Shiva, then you will get mukti. If there are some organizations who are doing that, that is their challenge. That is not what Hindu culture says. In Hindu culture, the Vedas and every scripture that we see glorifies all forms. You can be a non-believer, you can still be a Hindu. You can be a follower of Shiva or a Vishnu or a Durga or a Devi, you are still a Hindu. You can worship the formless, you are still a Hindu. You can worship any form, you are still a Hindu. So you can take any marg, you can take Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Raja Yoga, Jnana Yoga. You can follow any marg, you are still a Hindu. And is Hindu culture imposing itself on anybody else? Is Hindu culture saying that we are the only culture and our culture only should thrive? And if you don't follow our culture, we can kill or convert you? No, that is fanaticism. That is fundamentalism, where you cannot accommodate anybody else. Has this country not accommodated everybody, every persecuted community in the world, whoever has come here? Bharat has accommodated all, because we don't see the divisions. We see that we are one whole family. And we stay together, we live together. Persecuted people, when they come, we serve. Our attitude is everyone is divine, so we serve. So that's why inherently we are secular, because we respect all paths. And many Eastern traditions born from this are secular in that way. They are not telling people that if you don't follow this, you will perish. No, you can follow your path. That is secularism. That you allow everybody to thrive. Don't impose yourself on anybody. At the same time, don't compromise with who you are. If I celebrate a festival, it cannot affect somebody else. It is not harming somebody else. And if it is harming in some ways, I will try to understand and try to adjust, but not compromise on my festival. You see, that is secularism, where we accommodate everybody, we allow everyone to thrive together. Each one has their freedom to walk their path. Whether they believe in this or they don't believe in this, we still respect them equally. That is secularism. That's why we say Hinduism is inherently secular.
Thank you, Swamiji. Our next question, Swamiji, is from Ashwin Ramaswamy. And the question is, it is not normal, surely, that Hindus do animal sacrifice today. But wasn't it so that there was animal sacrifice back in the Vedic period?
So we have to understand that animal sacrifice is not there in the Vedic period as a demand from the Vedas that Bhagwan needs animal sacrifice. Okay. Animal sacrifice is in the sense of sacrificing animalistic tendencies, number one. Number two, when we say animal sacrifice, I have spoken to many Vedic scholars also, and they say that when they say that Ashwamedha has to be done, it is not that an actual horse is killed. A horse is made from the wheat flour, and that wheat flour horse is offered into the Havan. So it's not that literally a horse has to be killed, number two. Number three, when they say Ajaputram Balim Dadya, so when they say that, a goat has to be killed, so they translate the word Ajaha as goat. Please remember, these translations have come to us from people like Max Muller, who has not even visited India, who has no idea what the hell this country is about. They just go on a rampage, writing anything because he was given 9 times more the price of that time, of the translations the translators were getting that time. And he was told to write things with a vested interest. But look at the glory of the Veda. He wrote the translation of the Veda. By the end of it, he transformed. Without coming to this country, he transformed and he told the British, I'll return all your money, but please don't print what I have written. He repented. So when he translated, and many other people who have translated, they translate Ajaha as goat. Are Ajaha is not just goat. In Sanskrit, the word has many meanings. You take up Amara Kosha and you read, you'll know what are the meanings. Aja literally means a grain which cannot germinate. Okay. So a grain which is 7 to 8 years old will not germinate. Use such grains in the sacrifice. Because the grains which can germinate, don't waste them. That was their point. Use them for creating more crop. The grains which won't germinate, put them in the sacrifice. So animal sacrifice, Veda does not recommend. And also we find that people who are doing tantric practices or who are doing lower practices, propitiating lower forms of devatas and ghosts and such preta and bhuta, pishacha, all of that. So those jivas, they need some animal sacrifice, and these people who want to get certain powers from them, they will do animal sacrifice for getting those powers. But the Veda doesn't say do animal sacrifice for your well-being or for prosperity or any such thing. So it is people who manipulate it because they want to eat the food of they want to eat the flesh of the animal. So then they put it, oh, religion is telling that. Veda doesn't say that.
Okay. Sayanji, we have, we're supposed to be over on time. We'll ask one more question for Sayanji. Sayanji, this comes from Heyman Panditi. Sayanji, how does one cultivate intellectual sharpness and clarity?
So intellectual sharpness and clarity can be cultivated through manan, through reflection, as well as through understanding deeper, subtler concepts. So suppose we say, I want to think about space. Now, when you start thinking about space, so many challenges will come up because space doesn't have form. You can't see, hear, taste, smell, touch space. What exactly is space? If you start inquiring into that, the intellect will start getting more and more subtler and refined. So using certain concepts like that, like space or like deep sleep or like Turiya Avastha, consciousness is the highest, absolute truth is the highest. So when we start training our intellect in thinking of that, our intellect becomes subtler. To get clarity, we need to follow a systematic step-by-step process of understanding the scripture. We can't take any random book and start reading and we won't get clarity. So like we have in the mission, the whole study scheme that Gurudev gave us. It's a fantastic way. If you follow that scheme and do the individual reflection and group reflection, clarity has to come. So follow step by step. Reflect more than you read. Reflect on subtler concepts. And finally, clarity comes through intuitive realization also. When the mind becomes purer, clarity is automatically born in a pure mind. So it is not just an intellectual quality. The heart has to be purified at the same time. Because if the heart gets purified, then intuitively one will know so many things, because all knowledge is inside us. External means are only, external things are only means to invoke that in us. So do sadhana to purify the mind. Have an altar of surrender. Ensure that the ego gets surrendered and the mind invokes more devotion and more love for the higher. Then clarity will also come.
Great. Okay. Thank you so much, Swamiji.